I'm Daboki and this is Okie Dokie Boki. Today I'm going to be talking about music, which is not really a thing that I focus on this channel, but I figured why not try. When I originally thought about doing this video, I had actually originally conceived of it as a my year in pop culture video, but then I realized all of the things that I wanted to talk about, with a few exceptions, a few reality TV exceptions, everything I actually really wanted to talk about was music related, so that's kind of unusual for me, and so I kind of just wanted to talk about, what all of this means for my 2020. I grew up playing violin and listening to a pretty eclectic set of music, but this year I feel like I've kind of changed the way that I listen to music. For one, I just think I'm listening to a lot more music. I think part of that is because I've gotten older, and along with getting more random back pain, I've also realized that the older I get, the less I am able to multitask by doing work and watching TV at the same time. I've also just been listening to a lot more albums in full than I used to, and I think before I used to be much more of a playlist person. I would listen to an album maybe just to pick out a few of my favorite songs and put them on a playlist. I've really been more about assembling songs that I really like with, no further thought, rather than someone who actually takes time to treat albums as their own thing. But I think this year, in part because I started engaging with more media about music, listening, I've listened to podcasts the New York Times podcast a lot, and I think that's made me think about albums in the past. But this year I also read Open Book by Jessica Simpson and Meet Me in the Bathroom by Lizzie Goodman, which are about the world of music, but different, very different genres. But I think those two different books, along with other things, just gave me more of an appreciation for what the album is and how it's constructed, or at least what it's meant in the past. I think, there are ongoing conversations about the state of the album in the modern streaming era or whatever. But even with engaging with books and articles and podcasts and stuff that are about music, I think music writing has always been kind of weird for me to read. I just don't fully get it. It's sort of like food writing, where it's yes, I eat food, I listen to music, so I feel I kind of get what we're talking about in terms of the substance, in terms of I know what a food is, I know what a music is, and I like cooking, I like performing music, those things make sense to me. But in terms of reading critical takes on music or critical takes on food, I feel I just don't get it. For comparison, I read, plenty of book reviews too, and even if I don't always get what people are talking about in their reviews or their analysis of a book, I feel I have enough of a sense of, I don't know, literacy with books, I guess, for lack of a better term, or the sense of how to read a book, to be able to eventually get at what's being addressed, whether, that's the characters or the setting or the writing style. I can eventually put those pieces together. I have a harder time knowing what those pieces are when we're talking about food or we're talking about music. And so I'll read these food essays or these music essays and feel the writer is talking about this whole world that I just can't see, especially when people talk about things like music production. I'm always just I don't get it, But of course, there are a lot of different ways to process music, and the one angle that I do get is celebrity, because I am super nosy. I'm a pop culture obsessive because I'm kind of fascinated by gossip, and I think that's part of why, at least for this past year, my top genre on Spotify has apparently been pop music. And this is despite the fact that apparently I also listen to a lot of music from the 2000s, a lot of indie emo rock from the 2000s this year. I was saying, usually I'm a playlist person. I think one of the playlists that I listened to the most this year outside of my album listening was a playlist I compiled of my favorite music from high school. So I did a lot of 2000s non-pop music listening this year as well. But going back to pop music, 2020 has been a weird year for celebrity in pop culture, and a lot of the gossip enthusiast communities and creators that I've followed this year, I've seen a lot of talk about just how super kind of over celebrities a lot of people are, or at least that's kind of their visceral reaction to a lot of what celebrity culture, at least in America, has been this year. And usually this kind of gossip is a form of escapism, it's a form of just being able to indulge in other people's ridiculous lifestyles. But I think collectively a lot of us are on edge this year, understandably. And so when you are in the middle of a pandemic, when you are at home thinking about all of the things that you can or cannot do this year, and then you log on to twitter.com and see Kim Kardashian West posting a thread about how humbled she's been by being able to invite all of her friends to a private island, again, in the middle of a pandemic. It's just not the same kind of escapism. It's not going to hit the same way. And so I think a lot of people that I've seen just kind of like anecdotally online talking about this, a lot of the conversation has been about just like being frustrated with this thing that would in any other year be just kind of like a funny, like, wow, look how ridiculous people's lives are kind of thing. And so that got me thinking about the fact that, like, against this backdrop of like what makes celebrities interesting or not interesting this year, like that got me thinking about the fact that like two of my like biggest high points pop culture wise have been in music. And so the first thing I'm going to be talking about is K-pop, and the second thing is going to be Taylor Swift. When I say that these have been high points, I very much mean that these have been high points for me. Everyone's got their own experiences, their own tastes, so like they might not be your high points. Also, I am not in any way unique for the fact that these are the two things that really stand out for me in 2020. Obviously, also both K-pop and Taylor Swift have been around for a pretty long while. And so like while one is a little bit newer for me personally, like than the other, a lot of people have talked and written about K-pop and Taylor Swift over the years. So this is like all just a reflection on like my own experience with them and like what this has to do with how I feel about 2020 and pop culture. I'm gonna start with K-pop because that is the one that I am newer to, and like I should just say, like, I am not a particularly dedicated follower of K-pop, partly because the world of K-pop is still overwhelming to me. I feel like it's a little bit like finding a new genre of book that you're into, where you're like, you know, I don't know, like if you're trying to get into sci-fi or romance and like you start to venture into like the world of people who are in those genres, like you just come in and you're like, wow, the people in this have really strong feelings about specific things, and I do not know how to navigate this, right? And so, you know, it's a lot to try to figure out where you're gonna start. But obviously, you know, bands like BTS and Blackpink have been having a lot of success in America, so I think it's also been a little bit inescapable. And the thing that K-pop has definitely made me appreciate this year is like how terrifying of a force YouTube in particular is for radicalization, because like I had the experience of like watching I think like one or two Blackpink videos and like just like starting with curiosity, and then I was kind of like, okay, yeah, these are fun, and like kind of watching a few other music videos, and like suddenly it was like my entire feed was taken over by K-pop videos where it was just like recommendations of like dance practices and fan cams and performances and reviews and like, I don't know, entire fan histories of these bands and stuff. And like seeing my feed taken over, not just by like a quantity of video, but like so many different types of these videos, made me realize just like how quickly and intensely you can start getting into K-pop. And I personally do not have the energy I used to have for fandom. I can't. I have been burned by my favorite authors. I have been consumed by watching really toxic drama unfold. So while there are a lot of things that I love about fandom and like how it brings people together through just like the sheer love of a thing that other people have made, and I love the communities and stuff that build around like the enthusiasm and stuff in fandom, I prefer to dabble in the outskirts, and that definitely goes for K-pop as well. With that said, I will establish here that the closest that I come to standing any K-pop artist is right currently my deep abiding love for Taemin. He comes from a boy band, but he also has his own solo stuff. I found him because YouTube was like, hey, maybe you should watch this video about like the hardest K-pop choreographies, and I was like, sure, why not? I don't know. I don't really know anything about dancing, but I like watching people dance. Like this'll be fun. And then you get to the end of it, and whoever put this video compilation together was like, this is the hardest dance in the world, and it's this Taemin song called Move, and basically the first 30 seconds or whatever are just him walking, but he's walking in this way where you're like questioning if you've ever known what walking is. Like he is just taking one step in front of the other, like, you know, the way that we all do, but like you're kind of like, have I ever actually done this before? Like what he is doing is walking, and what I do ostensibly on a daily basis walking, but the Venn diagram, the overlap between what he is doing and what I am doing, there is no overlap. And that's been, I think, what's really drawn me into his music. But like the music itself, I really, really love, and it's like combined with these visuals that have this really androgynous energy, especially like down to like the backup dancers as well and how they're costumed. So like all that packaged together with the choreography, I just think is like amazing. And also, he released 2 albums this year. And so like between him and Taylor Swift, which we'll get to, like I feel personally deeply blessed by the fact that 2 of my favorite artists have released 2 albums in the year 2020. So what does this whole K-pop thing have to do with what I've been talking about in terms of celebrity culture? So I read this blog called Lainey Gossip. It's a pretty popular blog, and on it they talk a lot about like the work of being a celebrity, of building celebrity, of building fame. And they talk about it in a bunch of different contexts. Like, you know, they talk about musicians and actors and royals, and they're really just kind of making the point that fame has a lot of work built into it. There's a lot of stuff that goes into delivering a certain image or message about yourself. And I think for me, part of the fun of learning about K-pop is seeing how much of that work is made front and center in the industry. There's a lot of comments out there about like how K-pop stars are manufactured. And like, first off, that notion, the way people talk about K-pop stars that way, I think is loaded with a lot of really like racist stuff against East Asian people and like notions of like personality. And so I think like on its own, like it's already really problematic. I think it's also pretty ignorant of how much like manufacturing goes up in the creation of our own American pop stars. We just don't see that manufacturing as obviously because record companies in America aren't like publicly laying out the work that goes into making their stars. I think Jessica Simpson's memoir is a really good reminder of that. You know, she talks about these early auditions that she went on and like stuff like the Mickey Mouse Club auditions where she met Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, and you see the early days of like how their career trajectories were shaped and understood not just by them as like individual kids, but more importantly by the adults around them who are gonna like turn them into a certain kind of pop star. And Simpson also gets into this with like her own career and how her image was shaped in a particular way based on like what she looked like, based on what her voice was, and based on what other pop stars were already out there in the market. And when I say that I think K-pop is more transparent about this work, I don't want that to be misconstrued as that I think they're like somehow being more virtuous in some way, because I don't think that's the case. There's plenty of stories about the horrific abusive stuff that happens at these companies and the level of control that they have over their trainees' lives. And it's also not like they're operating with the intent of being transparent. Their actual goal is every bit as like branding oriented as anything that Disney does. But when it comes to the fandom, I think the thing that I have found really wild about it is just how much like K-pop fans are aware of not just the singers, but of the companies that are behind them. I don't know if the conversations I follow are in any way representative of like the fandoms as a whole. Again, I am dabbling only in the outskirts. It's really wild to me just how much like a lot of fans are following not just the music, but also the business of K-pop as well. And so I think like my takeaway from this, my takeaway from K-pop in this year is that in this year where like American celebrities seem very unsure of what they're supposed to be doing with social media, it's kind of refreshing to find this whole other celebrity ecosystem where like what they're showing and what the fans are appreciating is the actual work that they do as, you know, as musicians and as celebrities. And that brings me to Taylor Swift. I've been a Taylor Swift fan since like somewhere around the mid-Red era, I would say. It kind of took some convincing, but like once I was in, I think it was like, I was definitely in. So this for me has been a very exciting year as a Taylor Swift fan. When I originally conceived of this video, I knew I was going to talk about K-pop and I knew I was going to talk about Taylor Swift. But I was kind of like, you know, maybe it's weird to make my like 2020 recap video before 2020 is over. Like, you know, like when you read those best of 2020 lists, whether it's reading or music or whatever, you're always kind of like, yeah, but like you still have a few weeks left in the year, like if they come out in December. But I figured the way that I had conceived of this video that like I was going to avoid that problem because I'm not listing out my favorite albums of the year. I'm not listing out my favorite songs or anything like that. I'm just doing some navel gazing here. Like what could December remotely change or add to my feelings about music this year? Apparently Taylor Swift heard me and was like, you are so stupid. So I need to establish just really for my own sake, that this is the 3rd time that I have had tickets for a Taylor Swift concert and have not been able to go. I had tickets to 1989, I had tickets to Reputation, I had tickets to Loverfest, and the first 2 times, you know, stuff came up and just like I couldn't make it. This year, a fucking pandemic came up and I couldn't make it, and so now I feel like I'm cursed. But with that said, when Folklore came out and like everyone was on Twitter listening to it at the same time, that actually kind of felt like a concert experience. Like it felt like a live music experience, or at least as close as you're gonna get to it in 2020 in a healthy way. And so when she had the audacity to announce Evermore, out of the blue, I was excited, not just because like I was like, cool, more music, but I was also just like excited because I was like, Twitter's actually gonna be kind of fun today, right? Like we are all amped up. We are gonna listen to this album. I'm gonna stay up way past my bedtime just to listen to this album with other people. Like I was just excited for like that kind of like community experience. So now that I've listened to Evermore just a lot, just like constant repeat, just loop it back, Spotify. My current favorites are Champagne Problems, Ivy, No Body, No Crime, and Marjorie. I think Gold Rush is starting to grow on me because it's just kind of such a weird song. And I think Long Story Short and Closure are probably the songs that do the least for me. Not because I dislike them, they just don't really hit me in any particularly exciting way right now. It's really tempting to compare Evermore to Folklore, but I think it's like also pretty unfair because I've spent a lot of time with Folklore in the past few months, and especially now with the Long Pond sessions. And so maybe at some point I'll prefer one of the albums more than the others, but I don't know that I particularly feel any inclination to like get to that point because I do think Folklore and Evermore work really well as like sister albums. But also like the songs that I love on Folklore, like I really, really love them. Like definitely like they are top Taylor songs for me in general. Like I think my personal top 5 right now, because I could not narrow it down to 3, are Exile, My Tears Ricochet, Mirrorball, This Is Me Trying, and Epiphany. I also do really love Hoax just because I think it's like such a, I don't know, there's something so unsettling about Hoax, and I've like spent all of this time trying to figure out whether or not I think it's a love song, and I think the fact that it has that tension to it, I just love that song so much. A lot of Taylor Swift's success is built on her ability to write songs and to write these stories into her songs that like you can easily put yourself in. So those might be like the love songs or the breakup song. But for me, my favorite Swift album going into 2020 was Reputation because it's so much about her place in her career at the time, and it just has this real sense of a crossroads to it in terms of how she understands the relationship between like her professional and personal life. And like I cannot relate in any way, shape, or form to the level of success that Taylor Swift has had or the level of feedback that she gets. I am not winning a Grammy and I am not making Kim Kardashian mad. But what I can relate to is like being an overachiever who's hit their mid-20s and feeling kind of like frustrated about the career track that they've put themselves on and like the expectations that they've placed on it, whether that's expectations that you've determined for yourself or expectations that you think other people have put on you. And also of finding some sense of solace and grounding in a relationship alongside that quarter life crisis. And I'm definitely projecting a whole hell of a lot of stuff onto this album. I think that's part of the fun of music is like there's all of this space in between the lyrics and the production to just put your shit onto someone else's song. But for what I have put onto this music and maybe her subsequent albums, Reputation to me is built a lot on that like initial stage of that crisis of just feeling really frustrated and angry and lashing out from that place. And then to me, again, for all of the stuff that I am projecting onto these albums, Folklore feels more like you're coming to the other side of that shift, to the other side of like having gone down that crossroads. And so like with a song like My Tears Ricochet, you might be assessing the damage, or a song like Mirrorball or This Is Me Trying, you're really kind of explaining to yourself or to someone else like you've kind of established almost like a purpose to yourself with your work that is often more internal, but still like in this case done with a sense of understanding that like when you're a performer, like there is still like a connection between you and the audience. Like all of those things to me seem so packed together. But with that said, part of the fun of Folklore and Evermore is that they're also not necessarily meant to be listened to in that classic Taylor Swift mode of connecting all of the dots, of like connecting all of the Easter eggs in the songs and like these things that you know have happened like because they've been reported on in tabloids or she's put them on her Instagram or whatever. So I don't know, like these readings of these songs in particular, like do they necessarily hold? I have no idea. I like I said, I am projecting onto them. And if I'm wrong, that's fine. I think what I've been finding really interesting is the way that Swift has been talking about how she really wants to move away from her earlier diaristic style of songwriting and that she wants to focus more on telling stories. And I'm pretty excited for that. I feel like it's probably more sustainable for her, and also as an audience member, like as a fan, I also think it's more sustainable and interesting to me to be able to engage with music that's not requiring me to like follow this whole separate narrative like played out on Instagram and like in gossip blogs and everything. And like obviously I am still reading into her songs and like extrapolating from them, but I think what I'm excited for is to move away from the really, really like literal interpretations, like the very like I think this lyric is about this person and this particular thing that we saw play out in this kind of situation. That kind of reading to me is a little bit more like what we I think sometimes learn of as symbolism in middle school, that feels sort of like a 1-to-1 ratio of imagery image and meaning rather than the more open and compelling act of interpretation and reflection. And like with that said, again, there is also a very clear place for that literal interpretation, especially when we are talking about Taylor Swift songs and her early music in particular. And also, like I said, like I am nosy, especially with gossip. Like I am never going to pass up the opportunity to learn some shit about other celebrities from Taylor Swift lyrics. But in the end, a song like All Too Well, it endures not because it's about Jake Gyllenhaal, but because of how it like hits on people's like sense of this bitter nostalgia related to like maybe an old relationship. So that even if you are not the person whose scarf is in someone else's drawer or whatever, like you still feel that image in relation to whatever it is you've experienced in your life. I kind of see Taylor Swift as sort of belonging to that very millennial digital media writer kind of thing where you like feel like you have to like almost exploit yourself for clicks, sometimes to an extent where, you know, people are like, no one asked for this, even though also definitely people are still clicking. But really, you know, that is all just a lure to get people in. What keeps people reading the writing is actually the skill and the craft that goes into it. And so while she's built her success on these really diaristic songs and like I have enjoyed them, I'm also really excited to see like what direction her songwriting goes when she tries things that are a little bit more branched out from that. Like maybe that diaristic component is still a part of her songs. Like, you know, there's no way that you don't ever write from your own experience in some way. But I'm really excited to see it layered with all of these other different things going into her music. And more than just kind of shifting away from her usual mode of songwriting, Swift has also talked about the fact that like writing for Folklore and Evermore was different because she wasn't thinking as much about how to perform these albums for a stadium tour. Plus she's sort of changed up the way she's marketed these albums, right? You know, like with the surprise drop. And like as someone who didn't really like enjoy the singles that she released the past few eras, like before the albums actually came out, and was like those singles actually made me feel like, oh no, I don't know if I'm gonna like these albums. And then they came out and I did end up enjoying them. Like that whole process, the fact that that has not been part of the process this time has been kind of a relief. And so stepping back into like my bigger thing about celebrity culture and escapism in this year, I think what I really like about Folklore and Evermore, just thinking more broadly, is kind of how it seemed like Swift was able to embrace this almost like contradiction that exists between how, like, I don't know, speaking very, very generally, I cannot pretend to be speaking on everyone's behalf. It seems like we do want some form of escapism this year. I mean, there's a pandemic going on. We don't all want to be like just stewing in that, but we also don't want all of the excesses of celebrity culture. And some of those excesses might be like thinking we need to know every single detail about their lives. And some of those excesses might be in the imagery that they're putting out and the things that they're consuming. And like at the end of the day, Taylor Swift is still a mega celebrity. She's still super rich. So I'm not going to pretend that like there's probably not some excess in her life outside of these albums. You know, like that is, I'm not going to like assign some virtue to her or her work just based solely on the fact that I think Folklore and Evermore hit on a particular nerve in pop culture this year. And she's probably still chasing the awards and the numbers and all of that. So like that is all fine. That is like all a part of her career. And so like I don't think of these albums as necessarily changing like the face of Taylor Swift as a musical institution or whatever. I think what's really exciting for me with these albums is the fact that they have so much uncertainty attached to them. Like we have really no sense now for like what comes next besides the re-recordings. We don't even like have a sense of what to imagine a Folklore tour even looking like. And I don't really remember feeling that level of uncertainty with any other Taylor Swift album. And I think those things are so much more fundamental and connect so much more to like the work of Taylor Swift versus her personal life, even if the personal life obviously still informs it. And I would guess for someone like her at her level, I don't know, like again, can't relate at all to her level of success, but I would guess that that level of uncertainty is probably weird, but from the outside, it's really exciting. Even if she does revert back to what she's done before, the fact that Folklore and Evermore exist gives like a whole new flavor to what that music will mean and how it's going to be taken in. And so I think, again, kind of to bring it back full circle, hopefully, I think what I'm getting from this year in music, what these things like both K-pop and Taylor Swift have sort of like, for me, kind of helped me reflect on, is that like while I am still figuring out what like the pieces going into a song are, what I really enjoy is the context around it. Sometimes it's the celebrity who makes it, it's the industry that makes it, sometimes it's the people that you're listening to an album with, sometimes it's the TV show that a soundtrack shows up on, sometimes it's just a really weird, fucking year. So, you know, this is the context that I have for all of these different bits of music for me that have been really exciting for me. And I have no idea if that's going to be what music in 2021 looks like. Maybe I'm going to move completely away from this. Maybe Lorde is going to finally release her new album. And so that will be a whole exciting thing to talk about next year. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the context will be next year. And I'm really excited. I don't know if I should say that I'm excited for 2021 because it feels like that's just setting us all up for failure. So I guess let me know what your music has been this year. What was your Spotify top 5? What was surprising for you with music this year? And also if you want to leave me suggestions for your favorite like music documentaries, favorite music podcasts, favorite music writers or whatever, let me know down below, because I guess my goal for 2021, outside of reading a bunch of things and whatever, is to also just learn some more about music. So thank you guys for watching, and bye.